Well, hello, and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 6 of The Magician's Nephew, the beginning of Uncle Andrew's troubles.
1/3 of the way through, and his troubles are just beginning.
A third of the way through. It's kind of a long chapter title here, too, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have none of our listeners care about this, so I guess I'm starting off with some riveting information. But we have had this.
The pages were printed with ink.
We have this Lamppost Listener kind of master schedule that has existed for about 5 years at this point, since kind of the first inklings. Hey, see what I did there?
Nice.
The first inklings of an idea. It was even before we even knew we were going to talk about Narnia. And each episode title has, with the exception of one in the Silver Chair, How They Discovered Something Worth Knowing, has always fit in this kind of Excel spreadsheet, or Google Sheet is what we use. Except this is now the second time we have a title so long that it cannot fit inside. I had to change the font to make it fit. So again,
you didn't just move the little slider?
No, it gets to the point. One of the things I really like about it is the fact that maybe we'll. I don't know if anybody would ever want to see this stuff, but is you can see.
You should sell an NFT of the original.
I don't even want to talk about that kind of stuff. That's like the monkey thing, like the apes.
Yep.
I don't get it.
Yep.
Do I need to get it?
The only thing more boring than spreadsheets is talking about NFTs. Is
it one of those things where I can just continue to be ignorant, or is it something that
you don't need to worry about it?
So it's not because I'm still a young guy.
When you were a kid, did anybody ever put your name on the moon or buy you a star?
Is it that kind of thing? Okay. Yeah. I just
want
to know if it's one of those things where I'm not paying attention to it all right now, but will that hurt me 20 years from now when that's the only thing we use to pay with my like
Tupperware?
Exactly, yeah. I feel like that with all that like cryptocurrency stuff, I don't pay any attention to it. But every once in a while I'm like am I going to regret that in 50 years? And if I am, then whatever. I'm not paying it. I don't.
All my money's in Beanie Babies and Pokemon cards.
Well, that's good. You're very rich in the 90s.
Yes.
Although I got to ask you something, and I feel like you would know this kind of stuff. Pokemon cards really big again, right?
Well, as you taught me, they never weren't big.
Well, the kids are still into them for sure. But like collecting them is big again with adults, right?
I don't know. I think there have been some videos of people finding expensive ones, but I think that's really more of a people sharing stuff on the internet phenomenon than a.
Well, my thing the way that I came to be aware of this new sensation, which I don't know much about, is twice in the past week. I have come into a sign. One was at Target, and then today at Barnes & Noble, where they had, because of I don't know why they did this, but they have limits on how many Pokemon cards you can buy. And I kid you not, at Barnes & Noble, you go up to the register and they'll have books that are reserved and stuff behind, for people. All their Pokemon cards were back there. Which one? I had no idea Barnes & Noble even sold Pokemon cards. I guess they're just trying to stay alive, and it's not a good time to be a bookseller. I'm glad that Barnes & Noble is still there. I'm rooting for them, but it was all Pokemon cards, and it said limit 2 per customer. And I was like, is that a thing? Is that an issue? And then I thought back, wait a second, Anna and I saw in Target a similar thing where they had moved, like in Target, they have all the baseball cards and stuff like that kind of near the registers and whatnot. Bless you.
Thank you.
And I don't know, maybe people heard you sneeze or not. I might have been able to edit it out, but sometimes it's a little hard. And they had moved them. It says you no longer can find Pokemon cards. You have to go to customer service, like they were packs of cigarettes or something. Yeah. You have to, just like, what has happened that they have to remove these from shelves?
That actually happened to me in the 90s. For 3 weeks, I was really into baseball cards, and I tried to buy some at Walmart because I heard that's where you could get them. And I asked a person for help, and she said, "Oh, we don't have those anymore because people kept stealing them or something."
I'm not trying to be judgmental here. Is there any way people under the age of 40 are still into baseball cards? And I love baseball. I'm a huge MLB fan. I love the game so much. Is anybody collecting baseball cards anymore?
I just happened to walk past a collectibles store.
Okay.
And I was curious because I saw a set that I used to have as a kid in the window. And I don't think they're worth much more than they were when I bought that early 2000s.
I just didn't know. I mean, it's great if people are into that. I had a Mark McGuire card that I absolutely. It was like a holographic, you know what I mean? And that was like the coolest one I had in my. I mean, I had a baseball card collection because who doesn't? When you're 8 years old,
it's fun.
It's fun. I have no idea what happened to any of those things. They were in. I had the little notebook, and they were all in the sleeves, and you probably had stuff like that too.
I did, yeah.
This is actually related to the show. Other people had Pokemon cards. I had a couple. I had Lord of the Rings cards.
Oh man,
yeah.
I just saw Star Trek cards. We were at a kind of like a scrap material surplus store, and they had this big box of Star Trek cards.
What season of the show, or what series of Star Trek?
I'm not sure.
All the way back to original series. You talking TNG?
It seemed like it was more 90s 2000s.
Okay. Well, this is a Star Trek podcast now, so let's go ahead. Why don't you rank all
how many
the Star Trek
how many
TV
other
shows
things from pop culture can we reference in the
before we get into Narnia?
The next 2 minutes.
Well, let's actually we'll move away from Star Trek. Although, if anybody hasn't watched Strange New Worlds, go check it out. I had a lot of fun with it this season. Although I'm sure it's ended by the time that this episode comes out, like the season or whatever. But I had a lot of fun with Star Trek Strange New Worlds. But this chapter here, chapter 6, the beginning of Uncle Andrew's troubles, a lot happens here. We're going to go between 3 different worlds in just one chapter. I guess technically it's just 2, but they're coming back from Charn at the very beginning, so we'll count that as one of them. We're going to go Charn to the wood between the worlds, and then all the way back to London in about, 8 pages, maybe less than that. So
yeah,
a lot going on. Phil, why don't you remind us what happened in this chapter?
All right, here's a summary. Polly and Diggory emerge in their world, but are horrified to realize that the Queen has grabbed a hold of Polly's hair and journeyed with them. Weak at first, the witch begins to recover her strength, then demands to see the magician. When Uncle Andrew reveals that he is the subject of her inquiry, she barely believes him. Nonetheless, she says she will allow him to be a servant as she takes over his world. The witch sends him off to fetch a chariot or a taxi, and after a moment stalks off to speed up his progress. Alone, Polly and Diggory apologize to each other and make friends, while Andrew is in another room trying to drum up both courage and some funds from his sister. Aunt Letty refuses to give him any more money or to believe that he has a visitor, then is startled by Jadis bursting through the door.
Bursting through the door. Great summary there. Let's just jump right in because there's a lot that I want to get to here, especially I kind of want to rush past the wood between the worlds because I really want to talk about what happens in London. Do you have anything you want to talk about in this first instance of Jadis being weakened as soon as they get to the wood between the worlds?
I'm really curious why that is. I wonder where she draws her power from, and I was surprised that we didn't get much more information than that.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious, will we ever get more information? Because right now I'm actually kind of okay with not knowing because there's a nice mystery to it, and it's clear that it happens there, but she starts to get her strength back when she's around people, like more than 2 children.
Yeah, I don't know that we actually ever get an answer to that. As the fantasy nerds would say, this is a soft magic system, and so not us because we're cool. We have a podcast about children's literature. No, teasing. But I don't think we actually get an answer to that at all. Instead, I think it kind of remains a mystery. At least from the last time I read this, I don't think that Lewis actually goes back and addresses that. I do wonder if this has more to do with the simple shock of leaving her world. I wonder if that's just it. Although it does seem to be more of a magical problem, like she's physically drained from this transporter incident here. To go back to Star Trek. So, I mean, what's your theory here? What else could it be?
I'm curious if it is not having any subjects or beings to pull from. You know, she's used to being in charge and ruling. Maybe she gets her power from being in charge of people or just having people around in general.
Yeah.
Maybe she's a very, very, very extroverted person. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, no matter what the reason is, she is left weakened and unable to do much. And Diggory and Polly quickly find the correct pull back to their world. So you and I were concerned that they wouldn't be able to find it, but they quickly found it. The grass did not grow back. And they get in, they're ready to go back to our world, except Diggory pauses. And I want to read just that one sentence real quick about his, there's a couple sentences here, but let me read that just for a second. They had put on their green rings, but Diggory said, "Oh, bother, what are we to do?" He couldn't help feeling a little sorry for the queen. And just that part, that's that one small paragraph. Diggory pauses. Polly says she's probably just faking it. Don't worry about it. But that quick second or two that he pauses is enough that when they do start going back to our world,
she bends his ear.
Jadis has latched on to Diggory's ear. And usually you and I don't talk about the episodes before we record them at all. Mm-hmm. But I texted you a while back around this episode asking a question that I don't have an answer to, but I want to hear your response, which is Diggory's mercy here. Well, maybe we shouldn't call it that, but I'm going to call it that. His mercy, or at least his empathy here for the witch, is really interesting. He pauses. He feels bad for her, despite knowing that she killed all the inhabitants of her last world, but seeing her in this state gives him a reason to pause. Is his pause here, is it Christ-like mercy, or is it foolhardy?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Is this a mistake, or is this the right thing?
I was leaning toward maybe it is Christ-like until you reminded me that she had killed all those people. And I think that makes it a little more on the foolhardy side, where at a point you just have to act a little faster than he is doing here. I do think that there's probably a space for mercy. I mean, the theology gets weird when it's a fictional character who is
we can
from a different world. We can suppose
it's a safe space to do that.
Yeah. I feel like there should always be a chance for mercy, but this is clearly a trick.
Is it?
It feels like it.
Is it clearly a trick?
What if they had just left her there? What would have happened?
Well, let's go back before I answer your question.
If she was so weak, how did she jump up and grab his ear so fast?
You and I talked about her being weak. Neither of us, we both took it to be serious. As we were talking through what happened here, neither of us mentioned she's faking it.
Right. But
so
I don't think that she may have been a little bit weaker, but she still got up so quickly.
So you
grabbed
think
his ear.
this? But see, here's why I don't think she's faking it. Everything we know about Jadis, especially the pride that she has, which we have seen. We know about in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but that's after this. But the pride she has displayed in just the last chapter, in chapter 5, and even through her narrative, telling us what she did before she said the deplorable word. This is a woman who values her power. And it's hard to imagine her taking some kind of route that would make her look weak. I just can't imagine that this character would go, "Ooh, I know the way to trick these people, and it's to fake being weak." I don't know. I mean, this has happened so quickly. All of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, she goes from her world to a new world. When that adrenaline's kicking in, is this the kind of person who's going to all of a sudden just fake being dead or fake being weak? I don't think so. I think that she would be extremely aggressive. Think about the way she acts when they're in London. As soon as they get there and she has her power back, she doesn't, put on any air. She's not pretending. She goes back to being aggressive and oppressive. So here, to see her be in such a state of weakness, I think it has to be real.
I feel like she is weaker. I just think that she's exaggerating it to buy herself time.
Okay.
I think she's pulling a Palpatine.
When does he do that again?
He says he's so weak when he's been...
Oh, in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah. Okay, that's true. I don't know.
And he loved power too.
He did.
But he knew how to bide his time.
So
she did too. She's been sitting there super still for who knows how long.
Well, she was frozen, but So you think that this is a bad decision by Diggory?
Yes, but he's not exactly responsible for that decision. He's a kid. I think that that kind of trick only works once or twice until people start to figure it out.
Well, but he is responsible, maybe not for that one decision, but he's responsible for waking her up. That was 100% on him.
That's him.
There's no one else's fault but
for
his.
this particular thing. It's not his fault that he fell for it.
Okay. See, with this decision, I mean, obviously I've made it clear. I think Jadis is really weakened here, and I am uncomfortable, even though I'm the one who asked you the question. The more I've sat thinking about this, I'm uncomfortable making a call, or at least I was uncomfortable making a call. And so I went to a place that many of us go to find advice, and that is Jrr Tolkien.
Okay.
So
I thought you were going to say Reddit.
Let's. One of the most famous scenes in the entire Legendarium takes place in the Mines of Moria, and it made it almost word for word into the movies as well. Frodo and the rest of the Fellowship are traveling through the Mines of Moria, and it's there that they notice that who is following them?
Gollum.
Gollum is following them, and I'm going to actually just read straight from The Lord of the Rings, a conversation between Frodo and Gandalf, to maybe help us, at least help me answer this question, or at least come close to an answer. So, and for anyone who doesn't, know The Lord of the Rings, I'm sure most people are familiar with. You think there's anybody who listens who hasn't even seen the movies?
Yeah.
You think there's okay?
Small independent film, limited release. Yeah.
Well, if you haven't, I mean, this might not make a ton of sense, but for most of our listeners who are familiar with this story, I think that they'll be able to draw the similarities too.
I think most people have at least seen a clip during a sermon illustration.
That's true. It depends on what kind of church you go to.
That's true.
One
that has a contemporary service.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, I don't know. Every church is going to have the projector there too. That's but so here is what Frodo says when he realizes that Gollum is following them. Oh, and you know what? I'm wrong. This is taking place at the beginning of the book. This is in Bag End. It's just in the movie that it takes place in the Mines of Moria. All right, here we go. Oh, what am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had the chance.
Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not a strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity.
I am sorry, said Frodo, but I am frightened. I do not feel any pity for Gollum.
You have not seen him,
Gandalf broke in. No, and I don't want to, said Frodo. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death.
Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not the least.
Man, that's so well written.
Tolkien is a genius. He is... that's so good. So good here, especially if... I won't give away the whole... I mean, it's been out forever, but Gollum and Frodo's... The conclusion of the ring has the two of them wrapped up together. Their story does end together. Mm-hmm. And that is so true. And, a lot has been said about this scene down in Moria, about the advice or the wisdom that Gandalf shares with Frodo here. And you wonder how much of this is Tolkien. Now, this isn't a Tolkien show, but you and I both love his works. And I wonder if a similar thing is happening here with Lewis. Now, I don't think Lewis is actually putting all that much stock into this response, but I do think that you and I, or any of our listeners, as readers of The Magician's Nephew, can maybe feel that same kind of tension, that it's a tricky decision, even if you're someone like you, Phil, right? And I'm speaking for you, so correct me if I'm wrong. And you're saying, no, this was the wrong decision. She's guilty of all these things. There is still part of you that's like, but it's not easy for me to say that. Like, I feel confident in my answer, but I clearly, maybe not clearly, but I can understand why someone might feel differently. It's one of those really nuanced things, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it's not an easy decision, and I am not 100% sure that I'm correct in this.
Especially when
I do think it's more fun to choose a side and try.
No, absolutely, yeah. But even we view it in light of the Gospels. I mean, there's parables that we can look to that say, like, there are many. Think about the parable of the talents and people who get their talents later in the day. Or I should have pulled this up, but I didn't. But people that were receiving talents later in the day, and it's like, well, this isn't fair. They're getting paid the same wages as the person who works all day long. And a similar thing. Well, it's not fair to have pity for Jada. She's done all these awful things, and while by no means is Diggory God, and that's kind of what Gandalf is saying. Like, you're not Eru Ilúvatar, right? If we go back to the Tolkien's universe, right? It's not your place to deal out that judgment, right? Yeah. Like, there are people who deserve death and don't die, and there are people who deserve life and are dead, right? And that's not our place. He said, at least don't be too eager, right, to deal out death and judgment. And that similar kind of thing here, I think, applies with the witch. Diggory is not God, so it's not his place. That doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable, that we don't punish people or anything like that. But I think that moment of empathy is not inherently bad. Diggory didn't say, well, let's forgive her for everything and just pretend like it's normal. He paused for a second and saw this person as a well, she's not a human, so but we maybe in Christian terms, we might say the Imago Dei, right? That despite the brokenness, the wickedness inside this person, she still deserves, right, his empathy in this sense. Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm saying?
It does. I think I'm still leaning more toward it is foolhardy. It is foolish, but maybe foolish is the right thing to do in this case.
Yeah. And I think where I would say is it'd be foolish. I don't think it's foolish to pause. I think it would be foolish to just be like, you know what? Yeah, I feel really bad for her. Let's go invite her to our world. Let's see if she's doing okay. No, she's an evil person.
Right.
Like, she needs to be held accountable, brought to justice. And I have no idea what that looks like when you've destroyed your entire civilization. I don't know what that means. Maybe just throw her back in Charn by herself. Like, maybe that's what they should have done. They're like, well, her punishment can be she lives here alone in the isolation that she created. Yep. Right? So I'm not at all saying, oh my gosh, just let's all forgive everybody and it's just flowers and hippies and it's all just, fine and dandy, right? No. That's not how I feel at all. But I think that his questioning of this person as a human being, again, she's not a human, she's half giantess, half gen, but still, I think that in of itself is not inherently wrong to try to see the good in someone.
Right.
Or at least to care about them.
Yeah. I'd agree with that.
Yeah. You're giving me peace signs like I'm a hippie now. Is that what? That's
I am not.
Cool. No.
Don't listen to him.
Well, I'm glad we got to read a little bit of The Lord of the Rings. That's oh man. I'm rereading The Hobbit right now, by the way.
Oh, fun.
It's which I've read many, many times. It's now my book I read to myself to sleep. So I usually read something for fun or in bed, but then eventually I'm like, oh, I'm getting really tired. Then I flip to The Hobbit, and then I just read myself to sleep.
Right. And
so I'm only on chapter 4, and it's been 2 months because I only read a page or two, and then I fall asleep very quickly. So
I'll tell you what, turning the brightness down and having a digital e-reader, and then you just you keep tapping until your eyes close.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't even matter if you fall asleep because it just automatically turns off. Oh, it's the best.
But I'm not sure what I'm going to do when I finish The Hobbit. I read all the kind of
You'll
stuff.
probably start it again.
Well, I was like, well, they're not going to want to reread Lord of the Rings. but I don't want to read Lord of the Rings while I'm falling asleep. I'll get too invested. The Hobbit is obviously, it's much more casual. It's much, it's written for children. It's just a lighter story. So it's fine. Lord of the Rings, I'm going to get way too into it. I'm going to read something like that and be like, I need to go think right now. I need to go pray. I need to go I can't read a passage like that and be like, okay, cool, time for bed. So I don't know what I'll do after that. Maybe I'll just reread The Hobbit again. So, well, any final thoughts before we go to London?
No.
Well then,
let's jump in the cab.
Let's travel to London. When the children return to London, the witch gets all of her energy back, all of her power. And in fact, let me read a paragraph that Lewis writes here. Diggory and Polly stared too. There was no doubt that the witch had got over her faintness, and now that one saw her in our own world, with ordinary things around her, she fairly took one's breath away. In Charn, she had been alarming enough. In London, she was terrifying. For one thing, they had not realized till now how very big she was. Hardly human was what Diggory thought when he looked at her, and he may have been right, for some say there is giantess blood in the royal family of Charn. But even her height was nothing compared with her beauty, her fierceness, and her wildness. She looked 10 times more alive than most of the people one meets in London. Uncle Andrew was bowing and rubbing his hands and looking, to tell the truth, extremely frightened. He seemed a little shrimp of a creature beside the witch.
The little shrimp comment is so good. You can just see him with, kind of a hunched over back, wringing his hands together.
Mm-hmm. And this is such a great chapter for Uncle Andrew, or at least for the character of Uncle Andrew, because it just shows how ridiculous he was. And we have to admit, back in chapter 2, he was creepy. He was a little scary when he's sitting there giving his plan, or even at the very end of chapter 1, when we arrive in his study, like, oh my gosh, who's this guy? And really from here on out, he's a bumbling idiot. He's not scary at all, because you actually see him next to someone who is frightening. And Lewis does such a great job with that.
Right.
But let me ask you, what do you make of the witch's beauty in our world? The fact that not only does she get her, well, you would claim that she gets her strength back because she never really lost it. She was just faking it then. But she's also appearing to them even more alarming than she was in Charn. Why do you think that is?
I think she still had some power, obviously enough to get up and grab somebody's ear really quickly, which is a long distance to go. That's just impressive. But now she's around all these people. She's in a different place, mm-hmm. and she seems to be drawing more and more power.
Yeah.
It also appears that she grows. Maybe she's even taller, or maybe it's that you now have something to compare it to.
Yeah.
It's similar to when you look at the moon, and depending on what it is next to, it looks bigger or smaller.
Sure. Yeah, I'm on board with the last part of what you said when it talks, especially about comparison. I think a lot of this, again, to kind of maybe use more Tolkien language here, we have kind of the presence of fairy or the fantastical in our disenchanted world, right? The witch belonged in Charn, which was a magical, fantastical place, right? And here in 20th century, early 20th century. I don't think. Do we get the exact year? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. But let's say it's very early 1900s. In London at this point, it's still a very disenchanted world, right? We've passed the Enlightenment. We've taken all those things that the discarded image, right, that Lewis talks about with the medieval worldview. We've taken all of that away, and everything is very hard, cold science. And in the presence of that world and that worldview, the Queen of Charn looks impressive. She looks amazing. I mean, she looks horrifying all at the same time. I love how he uses words that we kind of associate with being more positive, and then other words we associate with being more negative, all together to just describe how powerful her presence is. And that's because it's the presence of something magical in our disenchanted world. And I think that's something Lewis constantly wants us to think about. And really, for the first time, we get to think about it a lot more than just the first chapter of a book, because this is the most we've ever spent in our world in any Narnia book.
Yeah, I was surprised when the scene kept going and how long we stayed, because usually the whole point is to set up the transition to somewhere else.
Yeah, but we've now spent 1, 2, 3. This is the third chapter in our world, so half of the book at this point.
Right.
is in London.
And a significant amount of time. And
Yeah.
we'll see this for the next chapter or two.
Yeah, I mean, you can already see that next chapter is obviously where this ends. You know that we're going to be there for the next chapter as well.
Right.
What do you make of that as someone reading this for the first time, that we're spending more time in our world?
Once again, I think Lewis is doing something different than the other books. So we're now on book 6, and we've never done this before. And it's time to explore our world a little bit. And it's also a fresh way to see our world and to see a character when they're not compared to other magical stuff, but they're compared to regular people.
Yes, I love that point. I think that one of the great things we're able to see here is finally compare Narnia to our world and see some of the differences. And it almost makes Narnia, which, you're aware of the fact that we're going to see its beginnings soon. It allows us to compare those things, to juxtapose those two things, right? Our disenchanted world, which very much is the same in the 21st century now, too. It hasn't changed. We're still very much a disenchanted world. How we can compare that to Narnia, I think Lewis purposefully is having us spend more time in our world so that when we do get to Narnia, we really can see the difference. And this is also why I think this book, again, I don't want to get on my soapbox too much, but I really think this book is not great to read first. I mean, that's not like anyone who's listened to the show, what are we on, season 6, knows that you and I feel that way about these books. But I just think this is a bad introduction to the Chronicles of Narnia. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm just, old and grumpy and, stuck in my ways here. But I think if this is your first introduction to the world, it's so different than everything else that's to come if you do read these in chronological order.
I wouldn't say it's a bad introduction.
Well, I did. Okay.
I know you did. But I would say that it is not the best introduction. Lucy going through the wardrobe and that incredible magical transition and coming back and then trying to get her siblings to believe and come with her. It's hard to compete with the best. That is an amazing introduction to Narnia.
Yeah.
I think this one could still work. I don't think that anyone would have a terrible time if they read this book first. And some people do. A lot of people do because of the way it's published. But some people get started with the book that just happens to be available in the library. So
sure,
you might start with The Last Battle. That really seems like the worst one to start with. But
and you don't even know what happens and you feel like it's a bad idea.
Just because it says the last one.
Sure.
And 7 on it.
Yes. I never thought about it. Is that the only book that remains in the same place, no matter what order you read them in?
I think so.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the only one that doesn't change places, no matter what order you read. Which makes sense. Obviously, it's the last one. But I am probably overreacting here, which has never happened on our show before. But I don't love it. But I think you're right. I really don't think it's that big of a deal. But I think you just miss something doing it that way. But let's keep going. Let's see what else happens here. Jadis, as you mentioned in your summary, is not impressed by Uncle Andrew. Tell us what's happening there.
Well, she's been expecting someone who has real magic, and once she examines him by holding his face very close to hers, she sees that he does have some magic, but that it's not the same kind that she has. And after talking to him, and he says that he has a very old family, the Ketterley family, she realizes that, he's following books and spells and stuff, and that's very different than what she's doing.
Yeah. And that's interesting here because, again, we know very little about the way that magic works in the Chronicles of Narnia, but it seems to be like there's actually some order to it, which I don't know that we've ever gotten any sense of order in any of the magic before. It's all kind of very deep and ancient, and that's about as much as we know. But here she's talking about, your magic. He gets his magic from a book or from a family, and she's like, that's not really strong magic. And that's very interesting to hear from the two of them. They keep talking, and she realizes, okay, like you said, there's no real magic in your blood. We don't have people like you in Charn. But you know what? I am feeling merciful. I will let you be my servant. And of course, Uncle Andrew,
he says he'd be happy to.
More than happy to.
He said he'd be delighted. It's a pleasure. And then she immediately cuts him off because he's talking too much.
And this shows us really who Uncle Andrew is. He is absolutely a weak man who is really only concerned about self-preservation, but he masks it under this lens of superiority over everyone else. I mean, how long has he told us, and we'll get to this even later in this chapter, that he's not held to the same standard because he is so intelligent. But when the rubber meets the road, he doesn't even believe that about himself. Right. He has no problem becoming her. And again, how often do we see characters like this in literature where he doesn't mind being like the lowliest servant in the witch's entourage, which is only an entourage of one right now, but he doesn't know that it won't get larger later on. He's okay to be the lowliest servant here if it just means that he gets to be part of like the special crowd, right?
Right.
If he gets to be that close to power.
Yeah. And his survival instinct kicked in because he's compared to someone who's so much more powerful than he is.
Absolutely. Well, the witch asks him, again, I don't actually think at any point that Lewis refers to her as the witch here, but no, yeah, he does. I see that right there. On page 28, which I don't know if that's right for the Kindle, but I got 28. I feel like we've got to be further in like the real paper book, right? There's no way this is page.
Mine
28.
says page 78.
Yeah, Kindle makes no sense with these things. Location 831 of 2,200. Like that's meaningless. Come on, Jeff.
37%.
Fix that for us, please. She goes and asks him to get like a dragon or a flying carpet or a chariot, right? And Andrew's like, I'll go get a cab.
Right.
So he leaves, and it's then that the children are left with Jadis. And I think you had picked out a paragraph to read right here.
Yeah, this is where the children are wondering what Jadis is going to do based on what happened in the in-between world. The children were now afraid that Jadis would have something to say to them about what happened in the wood. As it turned out, however, she never mentioned it either then or afterward. I think, and Diggory thinks too, that her mind was of a sort which cannot remember that quiet place at all, and however often you took her there, and however long you left her there, she would still know nothing about it. Now that she was left alone with the children, she took no notice of either of them. And that was like her too. In Charn, she had taken no notice of Polly, till the very end, because Diggory was the one she wanted to make use of. Now that she had Uncle Andrew, she took no notice of Diggory. I expect most witches are like that. They are not interested in things or people unless they can use them. They are terribly practical. So there was silence in the room for a minute or two, but you could tell by the way Jadis tapped her foot on the floor that she was growing impatient.
What a interesting synopsis here by Lewis. An interesting aside to us as readers. My favorite line here, they are terribly practical, which is about the shortest summary you can ever get for any kind of Machiavellian worldview, right? If you don't want to go out and read The Prince, here's a synopsis. Terribly practical,
Yes.
right? I mean, everything is just a means to an end here for both Andrew and for the witch.
Right. And she's already moved on. She is just standing there waiting for her cab to get there. And
not even worried about the kids at all.
Right. And it emphasizes two things. One, she's still ignoring them. And two, she's already on to the next part of her plan. Mm-hmm. She is always moving forward.
Always moving forward, very much. And I want to maybe save this for later. We could continue to have more of a conversation about how this may reflect some of the scientism we talked about way back in, I think it was chapter 2, the last time we were with Uncle Andrew. And some of potentially Lewis's critique on some modern thought in the middle of the 20th century when he's writing. But I actually want to save that for another time, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So after this happens, we shift downstairs. We're not there yet. Diggory and Polly, they have to have, as our friends across the pond would call it, a row.
A row. But they call it PAX.
They call it PAX at the end. So tell us a little bit about this conversation.
They make friends again, is how I think about it in my head. Diggory says some stuff. He starts to make it worse. He says, well, if that isn't just like a girl. And then Polly replies sarcastically. And then Diggory does say he's sorry. And they part ways. She goes back home. Mm-hmm. And we're left a little bit wondering, and I'm curious, what is she going to do?
Is she coming back, or is this her end of the story?
Right. And is she, how long is she going to be able to stay away? Because I really doubt that she's gone for good.
If you were Polly, would you want to come back?
Yes.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yeah, I'm down. This sounds exciting.
Yeah. Even if you didn't want to get involved, you would understand that you're probably the most equipped to.
That's fair. And while I think
do.
she does, and it's true that Diggory holds most of the blame here, it was all of this started. The impetus here was Diggory and Polly trying to, go through the attic at the very beginning of the book, and that Polly was involved in that. Yes, and she's the one who touched the ring. Yeah, I mean, she even says, she kind of gives a list of his credentials here over the last few chapters of the mistakes that Diggory's made. She says, you only nearly screwed my wrist off in that room with all the waxworks like a cowardly bully, only struck the bell with the hammer like a silly idiot, only turned back in the woods so that she had time to catch hold of you before we jumped into our own pool. That's all, right? But despite that, I think that she's aware that she has some guilt to play in this too. Yes, no, I agree that most of this is Diggory's fault, but he wouldn't have even had the need to go into Charn or into the wood between the worlds had she not gotten transported there first, right?
Right. Yeah, and maybe there's a difference between is it her fault or is it her responsibility now?
Sure, that's true. Yeah. So then is when we transfer below to Uncle Andrew in his room. I want to hear your thoughts on this scene. We really get to see what he thinks of himself here.
Right.
Outside of anyone else there to put on a performance for.
Well, I think that he's been putting on a performance for himself.
Exactly, I agree, yeah.
This whole time too. So you kind of see his hands are shaking, he's nervous, he pours himself what's described as a nasty grown-up drink, and he drinks it in one gulp. A paragraph later, he's taking another big glass of this liquid.
Do you want to take a guess as to what this could be?
I don't know, probably something gross like with stevia in it.
Yeah.
No, I think it's alcohol.
Well, I know that, but like what, Lewis himself.
Whiskey.
No, but Lewis likes whiskey. Or do you think this is just him communicating with the
Two
children? Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
I think it's similar to locking yourself in a wardrobe.
You think it's that kind
He's saying it in a funny way, and I took a sip of wine when I was a kid. I grabbed it off the table and took a sip.
We got to call the police right now. You did what?
I knew that was going to happen.
This is it. All right, knock on the door. Go over there, buddy.
I took a sip of wine when I was a kid, and it tasted terrible.
They're going to get your parents now. You know that, right? Or did your parents know about this?
No.
Did they make you drink wine?
No.
Okay.
But they did leave it out.
Oh my goodness.
So
Sorry, I didn't hear what I know our listeners already heard it, but I was not listening to what you actually said after you drank wine.
So he puts on, do you want me to talk about the wine? Or do you
No,
want
I was being facetious. Go ahead.
He puts on a stiff collar, continues to drink, and he gets all dressed up. And then you see how he's trying to build himself up. And he talks about how he's pretty attractive for his age. He's a distinguished looking man, and he describes the witch as a superb creature, and it's pretty clear what his plan is. He's going to build himself up and then walk back out there, and he thinks that he's going to have more confidence, but he'll probably just go back into shrimp mode.
Yeah, it's so funny the way that, and again, one more thing, and this isn't always fun to do, but one more thing that I want to continue to return to, so I don't want to talk too much about it right now, but I think there's a lot of great discussion to be had here about the way that performance for himself, the way he's performing for himself. I mean, that's only gotten way worse in the last 100 years, especially with the rise of the internet and social media. But again, I want to actually save that for a different chapter. But he absolutely has lied to himself so much that he definitely, I mean, from my opinion, he believes his lies.
Yeah.
I mean, he's alone by himself. He has no other reason to talk like this other than he legitimately believes it's true.
Right.
He thinks he's going to woo this woman.
Yeah.
Who he's terrified of too, which is so funny, so interesting. But we get what is maybe the most of all of these, the most revealing conversation after he has kind of pumped himself up. He's put on his nicest clothes, his monocle, and walked downstairs to visit his sister.
To ask for money.
Yep. And she just rejects him flat out. So he goes downstairs, and some of the way that he asked this, where he asks her, not to be troublesome, my dear Gel, right? Gel, the way he pronounces it, kind of all fancy and important, right? He asks for money, and she's like, no, I have not given you money. Lewis doesn't tell us exactly what has happened, but that he managed his sister, Aunt Letty, or Diggory's aunt, her business affairs for her, and it went really badly, mostly because he was spending her money on brandy and cigars. And that she was much poorer now than she had been 30 years ago.
Yeah, but she had learned her lesson.
And so she's learned a lesson. She is not giving him any money. But he's like, no,
she's not taking mercy on him.
Yeah, she's like, you have to give me money. There's someone here right now. And she's like, you're nuts.
Right, and he describes her as a distinguished visitor.
Her
response is so good. She says, distinguished fiddlestick. There hasn't been a ring at the bell for the last hour.
And this is the end of the chapter. Go ahead and read that last paragraph.
It's the end of the chapter, and this timing is so well done. It just comes to an abrupt end with a piece of action right at the end. So she says, a distinguished fiddlestick. There hasn't been anyone here. And then at that moment, the door was suddenly flung open. Aunt Letty looked around and saw with amazement that an enormous woman, splendidly dressed, with bare arms and flashing eyes, stood in the doorway. It was the witch.
And that's the end of the chapter. Little tricky one to end on here, because right in the middle of a conversation, and I mean, I don't find it to be much of a cliffhanger in that I kind of can, I can expect what will happen next, right? I was trying to watch my words there. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you probably can too. Maybe you can't, but it seems like we kind of know how this is going to go down, right?
Right. It's also an interesting piece of timing because that's such a dramatic entrance. But we just saw the witch maybe however long it takes to get dressed, 5-10 minutes. This isn't a character that was forgotten about 10 chapters ago or 2 hours ago if it were a movie. This is a character that we just saw. We know she's tapping her foot waiting, and then she bursts in. So it's a miniature cliffhanger.
Okay, that's fair. That's true. And again, it's not like every chapter has to be a cliffhanger or anything like that. It's just one of those things where I think that everything that happens next in the next chapter, which is called What Happened at the Front Door, it's not hard to imagine some of the many things that could potentially happen at this front door.
Right.
Right.
Yes. And it definitely makes you want to turn the page.
Sure. I mean, it is interesting to see Jadis, and this is kind of where I want to transition a little bit of our conversation as we wrap up this chapter, to see her acting in such a different way than we ever did in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Here we are, 2 chapters in with her. How are you feeling about this character as someone we've spent a whole book with already?
It's similar to other characters where you start to get to know their backstory, but for some reason this one feels different. I think a lot of the times when you read a backstory of a character, it kind of takes away because the mystery and the not knowing is so powerful. But this is different. It just seems funny. It seems like we're going to hear these humorous things that happen because this character is now in our world. And maybe that doesn't happen as much where you have a villain from one series brought into a different world.
Yeah. I'm in agreement. I've always felt that here in London, I do think it changes when they eventually leave. I do think that here in London, she feels more comedic than anything else. Like her, and again, I don't think that's not necessarily a negative critique as much as it's just, acknowledgement of the fact that while we know that she is, evil and terrible, she more comes across like because she's this fish out of water, right? Like these exchanges of go get me a flying carpet or, a dragon, they're funny, right? Like they're funny exchanges because, the way that Andrew has to respond is I'll go get the cab, right? Yep. And that maybe, well, you don't know, but maybe when she arrives in the next chapter and she doesn't see she might not know what a cab is, but she doesn't see a, flying horse or something. She'll be like, oh, this isn't what I wanted. And that is funny. Like it's enjoyable, but I don't necessarily, at least at this point, and it actually does change for me, and I'll let you decide for yourself. I do feel like we have to wait till later on in this book where we start to really see, oh, this is the character we know from Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
And again, it's not that she's completely funny right now. Our introduction to her was, hey, I killed everyone.
Right.
Literally, I killed everyone in my world. So, I mean, she is terrifying. But here on our world, she's kind of funny.
Right. And that contrast, it'll be interesting to see that contrast as we get more and more information, but also see that transition as she becomes the Jadis that we know.
Well, Phil, any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, that's it from me.
Well, in the next chapter, I already mentioned the title, but next chapter is called Chapter 7, What Happened at the Front Door. And in that chapter, Jadis wreaks havoc throughout London. Probably won't surprise you to hear that's the case.
Yes.
But before we go, we're going to skip listener feedback today, if that's okay with you, if you will allow this.
Yes.
Phil is not allowing it. He's packing his things up. Can I actually say what you are connected to right now?
Yes, this is the next phase
The
of
next
our
generation of the
podcasting journey.
podcast.
We have all this fancy equipment, and I don't know how much this setup costs. It's not a ton of money, but it was, we bought kind of nice stuff.
We're intermediate podcasters.
And it is attached to a baby feeding machine.
It is that's you call it a high chair.
High chair.
Did you really not know what it was called?
I couldn't think of the word.
Okay. Phil, we've had some problems with Phil's mic stand connecting to my dining room table. So he was adjusting it, which is why I brought it up. And Phil is connected to the high chair tray.
And this setup keeps things interesting because it doesn't stay, but it does slowly